Hi, everyone. Welcome to Class Action. My name is Alexandra Martinez. I'm a reporter here in Miami, Florida, and I'm the senior news reporter for Prism. I cover a variety of topics, including education, and I'm so excited to be hosting this panel today about the state of education advocacy in Florida. So a little bit about what we're going to be discussing today. Amid a barrage of book bans, curriculum changes, and legislation cracking down on classroom conversation in the form of bills like the Don't Say Gay and the Stop Woke Act, Florida schools have become the testing ground for alarming policies targeting crucial discussion about identity, history, sexuality, and more. After only a year and a half, the impacts have already been felt. Florida now leads the nation, surpassing Texas in the number of book bans, with nearly 6,000 instances of banned books since July 2021. Meanwhile, history is being censored. Last school year, the state rejected a new advanced placement course on African American studies because the course included reparations, the Black Lives Matter movement, and queer theory. Even Miami-Dade School Board, which has historically been the state's most liberal county, refused to pass an official LGBTQ plus History Month earlier in September. Looking into the 2024 presidential election, the stakes for our nation's public education system couldn't be higher. So today we have a panelist of speakers from different corners of the education world who are going to help us shed light on this very important topic. Before we get started, I want to take a moment and let our panelists introduce themselves. So let's get started. Steph, if you want to begin, and please make sure to state your pronouns.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Steph Rubino. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a teacher. I'm an organizer. I am a writer and a podcaster based in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and I've been teaching for about 11 years now. So I have some experience teaching in both public and private schools in South Florida.
Awesome. Max?
Hello, everybody. My name is Maxx Fenning. My pronouns are he, him. I am the founder and executive director of Prism, which is a different Prism. We are a youth-led nonprofit that works to expand access to LGBT inclusive education and sexual health resources in Florida. I'm joined by my kitten, who is very curious about what's going on right now and might climb into the frame at some point. And I'm happy to be here and happy to have folks joining us.
Awesome. Will?
Hi, my name is Will. I am an 18-year-old freshman at Florida Atlantic University, and I use every pronoun equally. As long as you're giving me respect, I don't care. And I'm a recent graduate of Winter Park High School in Orlando, Florida, where I was the president of the Queer Student Union. So I worked directly with a lot of students who are being majorly impacted by the current legislation. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for being with us. And Victoria?
Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Kirby-York. You can use VKY, she or they, in place of my name. And I'm the Director of Public Policy and Programs at the National Black Justice Coalition, the nation's leading civil rights organization focused on the Black LGBTQ+ and same-gender loving community. And I'm actually from Florida. I grew up in the Tampa Bay area, proud product of Hillsborough County Schools, and began my political career doing work all across the state of Florida. So always excited to be around so many folks from the Sunshine State, and look forward to digging in more with you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Brittany?
Thank you, guys. Hello, I am Brittany Frizzell. I use she and her pronouns. I'm a community organizer with Power Youth Center for Change based here in Miami, Florida. I also was a teacher for 3 years in North Carolina, where I'm from. And I also went to Law and did a joint program in community and social change. So I've been working towards these issues for about 4 years now. Very happy to be here. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here and everyone for joining us. I'm so excited to get into this. So let's lay the groundwork. Let's lay the groundwork about the laws and what they actually mean. We've all heard about the Don't Say Gay bill, right, which is officially the Parental Rights in Education law, and the Stop Woke Act. But what do these laws actually say? What are they restricting? And how are they intentionally left open to overinterpretation? Victoria, if you want to.
Yeah. Yes, I think this is a really important and critical question because what we've observed over the past 2 years is Governor DeSantis wildly misinterpreting his own law. And that misinterpretation has led to a climate of fear, harassment, and lack of safety, not only for teachers and parents, but sadly for the students who are supposed to be served in our public schools. When you look at the Don't Say Woke Act, which we sometimes refer to as the Don't Say Black Act, we see a huge misrepresentation of that particular law, where it was billed as something that was designed to keep critical race theory out of our schools, right? Which actually doesn't do that at all. Doesn't even mention critical race theory in the bill, for one. So let's start there. For two, the law actually mandates the teaching of African American history, in the state of Florida. However, the part that is actually written into the law is language around making students uncomfortable regarding their race, which is very wide, and although the perception and kind of what's pronounced is that we are talking about not making white children uncomfortable about their race or to feel bad about their race, to feel like they, oh, we're the bad guys in history, that kind of thing, which no one does when talking about history in this country. At least my experience in Florida schools, that wasn't a thing. The reality is that for a very long time, the students actually made uncomfortable about our race have been children of color, have been queer and trans children. And so you have an instance where the law is being painted as something that does X when it does Y, and also is presented as something for one group of children and not for another group of children. And you also have teachers who are scared to really talk about anything that touches on race relations at all, because they really don't understand the law. And the people that should understand the law are executing it in a way that has nothing to do with what's actually written as well. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding, miscommunication, and misapplication, which means lawsuits, right? Which means expenses, which means that it's going to take a while before the law is fully repealed, or stricken down through litigation, which is all part of the why this bill was even presented in the first place. And then when it comes to the Don't Say Gay or Trans bill, they use the word instruction, which is really broad, right? Is instruction only curriculum? Or, because we know learning takes place from the moment a student leaves the bus, right? It's sometimes the moment they leave their front door and get on the bus. So people are afraid to even have conversations walking down the hall with students about their partner, or to have a student like my daughter has two moms. If we were living in Florida, which is where initially we wanted to raise our family, her simply talking about her parents is something that some teachers are scared to even approach, because they're like, is that conversation considered instruction? Can I lose my job over it? And sadly, because it was written so vague, depending on who their leadership is really what determines the answer of that question, and what biases their leadership has and the way that they're going to wield and use the law or not. So I know others want to weigh in there, but there's a lot of tomfoolery afoot in the interpretation of these bills, and it is very intentional.
Absolutely. definitely see that. And there's also this whole quote unquote age appropriateness, right? Which can really be open to interpretation. Who's determining what is age appropriate, especially for children in high school, who some of them are already 18 years old. So let's get into who's being most impacted by these laws. What does the lived reality look like for students? Will, I know you had a particularly unique experience in high school at Winter Park. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And what legacy do you hope your activism left at the school?
Yes, absolutely. So, I being a high school student following the Don't Say Gay law was technically affected, but the students who were the most affected were the students who didn't have supportive families at home. A lot of kids rely so heavily on the school system as their sanctuary, as the one place that they can be themselves. I had students in the club that I ran who would come to school with a change of clothes in their backpack and change in the bathroom before their classes started, use a different name at school, relied on the support of the teachers, on the support from the teachers, support from their peers, support that came from clubs like the Queer Student Union, which I ran. And these are the students who are losing the only place that they're able to be themselves. These are the students who are now no longer able to be themselves without being forcefully outed to either their classmates or their family. And these are the students who are most at risk of suicide and self-harm and mental health struggles. And that's who's really being harmed at the end of the day. I'm not the one who's going to be hurt when they ban a book, because I am in a privileged position where I have access to these books regardless, but there are students who do not. And so like this book is gay, for example, which is banned in the district that I graduated from. It's a great book with so much information from everything from gay culture, gay history, gay sex education, being safe in the gay community, just teaching people that they can exist, and that's something that so many students would benefit from as young as elementary. If people try to argue this point that this isn't something that should be taught at schools, it should be taught at home, but nobody's teaching it at home. I have very supportive, very liberal parents, and I was never taught that being gay existed. I wasn't taught it at school either, and I struggled growing up because of it. All the way until 7th grade, I didn't know being gay existed, and I thought there was something wrong with me. And I'm aware that I'm gay and non-binary, and I learned that from my peers, but I was never taught that from my parents. It's something that needs to be taught in schools. Same with gay sex education. I was never taught gay sex ed in schools. I got all my information from the internet and from word of mouth. And as I got older and more mature and started like acting on being gay, I realized how my limited knowledge was detrimental to my ability to do things safely or properly, so everyone is being affected by these laws. I mean, even the recent rule passed by the Florida Board of Education that makes it so students can't change their names, that's affecting everybody. Obviously it's directly there to harm trans kids, like let's not get that twisted, but that is negatively affecting everybody. That's affecting every single student. My name is Will, but if I had to go by William in schools, if I couldn't go by Will without getting a parent to sign a permission slip, it just adds so much unnecessary drama and bureaucracy. And then of course the teachers are being negatively affected by this. Teachers they should have the freedom to go off on tangents and to explore different topics in the classroom. Learning isn't just sitting and listening to a curriculum set by the state. Learning is an interactive, multidimensional thing, and part of that is being able to have open conversations with teachers and with students. And teachers are so afraid to talk about their beliefs about anything nowadays. I had teachers that were liberal, I had teachers that were conservative, I had teachers that were gay, that were straight, and none of them felt comfortable talking about their opinions on anything that pertains to our current society and the things that actually affect people on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's really unfortunate and really damaging that we're not hearing these different perspectives. I should have been able to hear my conservative teachers' perspectives on these issues, as well as my liberal teachers' perspectives of these issues. That's how you open your mind. That's how we heal our country. But you know, it's all these restrictions being put on it are making it so hard for anyone to be a person in the school system, and it's becoming more and more like prison.
I hear you. I know that you know, something that happened last year when you were a senior was that you wanted to give a presentation on the history of the Stonewall riots, right? What ended up happening with that presentation? And, you know, is there still a space for students at your old high school to continue pushing back against these laws? I wonder what does that look like?
So the Stonewall presentation, I did that during my junior year. It was after the passage of the Don't Say Gay law, the original one, 1557, but it was before it was actually implemented in schools. I was allowed to give the presentation to my US history class, which was great. That was, up to the teacher's discretion. But after I posted a video of myself giving the presentation, my school and my teacher got a lot of backlash. And so then that ended up translating to me getting in trouble for having given this presentation, because my teacher and my school got in trouble for allowing me to give a presentation. I, in my US history class, was excited about a historical event that I wanted to teach the class that pertained to the time period that we were learning. And it ended up with my teacher, my school, and myself getting in trouble. And I think that's really unfortunate, because that's how kids learn, because a kid's going to learn way better from my presentation than they are going to from a video that we're watching that the state or the county chose for us. On the other side of things, students, I mean, ultimately we have access to the internet. Everybody has access to the internet, and people are going to know that queerness exists regardless of these laws, regardless of the lack of books. People are going to find out that being gay exists. We live in a country where it is accepted enough that you can't hide it. They can try all they damn want, but it's not going to work. And I think that part of my legacy, I guess, at Winter Park High was making that very abundantly clear to students. My school, Winter Park, is known for being a richer neighborhood, I guess, and so therefore more conservative. It's a predominantly white school. It has a reputation of being a certain way, but that doesn't accurately represent the people who go there. There's a big population of queer people. There are plenty of students who support us. And when I first arrived there, it really did feel like we were the minority. The administration was doing everything they could to protect the bullies and not the victims. And people were a little more I was definitely afraid to express myself to an extent, but especially after the walkouts, and this isn't just my school, this is all across Florida. After the walkouts, after people learned that this legislation was happening, there was a cultural shift at school. I felt, especially after the first walkout, there was a cultural shift at school, because when 800 students walk out and 10 of them are being homophobic, but the rest of them are on our side, it sends a very clear message to everybody in the student population, not just at Winter Park, whoever saw it online, the neighboring schools, the teachers, who's really in power. And I mean, this is just foreshadowing for the future that we're going to have. Gen Z doesn't have a problem with gay people. 10 out of 800 maybe do, and maybe they'll grow out of it, because where are those beliefs coming from besides their parents? So when you really look at it and you're like, why is Ron DeSantis putting all this time and effort into making it hard for people to learn about the existence of the LGBTQ community, banning books, all this stuff? The real answer is that they don't want an educated population, because they can't control an educated population. And Gen Z having access to the technology, the information, and the ability to talk to people around the planet that we do, we're not going to conform to that. We're not going to fall into that trap. So, things are going to get worse before it gets better, but this is temporary. And yeah.
Wow. So you brought up the way that teachers are being impacted. And part of these laws is that it directly targets teachers, opens them up to a slew of consequences, litigation, potentially losing their teacher's license. Steph, I know you've been experiencing harassment from a conservative group called Fathers for Freedom. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience dealing with these laws as an educator, even within the private system? What does that look like, and how has it impacted your teacher-student relationships?
Yeah. So I think there's, like, as Victoria was saying, the problem with these bills and these laws now, is that they can be interpreted in a variety of ways. And also we don't really know the extent to which they can be enforced. One of the things that I keep thinking about is that before I get to my situation, but one of the things I keep thinking about is how Ron DeSantis expanded the voucher program at the same time that these laws were being passed. And to me, thinking, I'm like, okay, well, if we expand the voucher program, which means more kids can be admitted to private school, but it is through state funding that they can be admitted to a private school, then that means that those private schools will have to follow the laws that have been passed, or at least that's the way that I'm interpreting it. And I think that that is, like, part of the plan. Like, the plan is to get into every educational environment that they can get into. Currently my school is not participating in the voucher program, but I don't think that we won't. I don't know. How long I'm going to be there is also, like, a question. But currently, what's been going on is, for me, I technically don't have to change my curriculum. I don't have to do anything. And so my curriculum, I teach AP language. And so that curriculum is totally up for, like, the choice of texts that I use is totally up to me. So I have developed that class into a class that is examining, like, American history, but from a literary lens, right? So we talk about racial capitalism, we talk about systemic racism, we talk about indigenous sovereignty, and, like, the infringement of that sovereignty. We talk about LGBTQ like, rights and history. So I've kind of, like, developed that class to be a space where my students can talk about these topics. And they know how I feel on a lot of things, but, like, I never push them to feel or think a certain way. In fact, it's, like, very open. And I'm accepting of all points of view as long as they have evidence to back up whatever argument they're trying to make, right? So if they don't, then we gotta figure that out together. So I haven't changed my curriculum, and so this year, I guess there are some parents at the school. I'm not really sure, because we haven't been able to figure it out and track down exactly who is involved. But there are some parents at the school that are I thought originally that they were unhappy with the curriculum, and I'm sure that they are, but the attacks have actually been on who I am as a person. So they're attacking me as a queer person, as a trans person, and that's kind of, like, the weird thing about it is that, yeah, they want me to change my curriculum, but it's really just about who I am, like, and how I present to my students. So the Fathers for Freedom basically put me up on their blog, and they also put me on their Twitter, and there's, like, a whole article about me on their blog. And so I guess they thought that maybe that would make me change my mind about my curriculum, but honestly, it just, like, made me angrier. I don't really know how stubborn, like, how long I've been doing this. I've been doing community organizing work in South Florida for 20 years. So it's kind of, it hasn't tested my resolve in any way. It's just kind of made me realize the extent to which these people will go. Since they can't do anything legally, they can't make a complaint to the governor, they can't do anything. They'd rather just they feel like they can just come after us as individuals, and that will like stop us in some way. So that's kind of where it's at right now. And that's what I've been dealing with for the past couple of weeks. I know I seem very cheery about it. It's just because like I'm trying to hold it together.
I'm so sorry that you're experiencing that. It's absolutely unfair. What support has your, admin offered, if any? And what can we do to support you in this?
Thank you for asking. I have a lot of support, I will say, from other faculty members at my school. Past students and their families have written in to like support me and to tell my administration to do something. Many past students and families who were like impacted by the curriculum in some way. And I don't say that to like kind of like I don't say that to like bolster myself. It's just like surprising the amount of support that you get when something happens. And so I'm trying to like really value that. And I have support from friends and family and stuff. My admin I think they're kind of at a crossroads of what they want to do. They don't want this to become a quote unquote bigger thing. And so that has led them to doing nothing, essentially. And the guidance that I was offered actually a little bit more towards the beginning of the year was to consider changing my curriculum, to which I said no. And I have still refused to do, obviously. So that's something that is, that's just something that I feel is not going to change. In terms of like teacher-student relationship, I know you asked me that earlier. I am only there for the kids. Like teaching is not like an easy job. It is fun when you're in the classroom, but everything outside of the classroom is devoid of fun. So it's kind of like or I shouldn't say not everything. Curriculum development is cool, but like, okay, everything else is devoid of fun. Bureaucracy is not fun. So I'm there for the kids. So in terms of our relationships, like it hasn't changed anything. I don't know which kids' family is involved, and I don't think they know either, to be honest, because it doesn't appear that way. Right now we're reading Beloved by Toni Morrison. And it just, the conversations that we've been having so far, it doesn't give me the vibe of like there's a particular kid who might be an issue or anything like that. So I think it hasn't really changed my relationship with them. I don't know if that will be different in like a couple of months, but I feel very strongly that like they feel comfortable in my classroom, and I feel like that's all that really matters to me. They as long as they feel comfortable and they feel like they can explore these topics together and with me, then it's all good. There's no problems.
Yeah, educators have such a difficult job. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Victoria.
No worries. I just also wanted to lift up that I'm sorry that you're going through this. But one thing that you said that really sticks with me is what you shared about your students. Thus, our kids are so much more brilliant and ready to have hard conversations than we were, or our parents' generation were. And it reminds me, I was in an education policy coalition meeting when, some of these bills were first cropping up. And we were talking about Ruby Bridges and like the parents in Virginia who were, causing a fuss about the story of Ruby Bridges integrating schools being shown because they were fearful that their kids were gonna be angry with grandma and grandpa, and like be like, oh, I can't believe they were these bad people. And my thought was, well, maybe the kids will see themselves as like there were good white people in that picture too. There were the National Guards folks that were protecting her. There's the teacher who taught her all by herself. White kids might be looking at those white people. Well, one of my colleagues interrupted me and said, well, when my daughter was taught that story in her elementary school, she related to Ruby Bridges. And like that comment, my brain just went, right? Because again, I was connecting white, right? But for the kids, they see themselves in the other child, right? They didn't necessarily see the racial divisions that we are so accustomed to talking about. Her kid was just like, I want to be as courageous as Ruby Bridges was. If something like that ever happened to me, they weren't thinking about grandma or grandpa. They weren't thinking about the protesters. They were just seeing themselves in this story of another young person. And I think so much of this are these parents who we weren't taught some of the things that our kids are being taught. And so sometimes parents feel ill-equipped to have certain conversations because they didn't, we weren't taught certain things. And so they're like, well, now I've got to figure out how to talk about this to my kids. And it's like, no, actually let your kids teach you. You don't have to necessarily know. I don't know the new ways that they're teaching kids how to do certain mathematical equations different from the way we used to do it. They have fancier calculators than we had back then too. So so there's some things that our kids are just going to have to teach us. And maybe that feels uncomfortable for some people. And so, and instead they're like, I refuse to have to learn something new at my age. I'm going to protest it because I can't see past the difference because I was steeped so much in difference, right? Whether they're folks who were part of the integration era or, were the kids of those parents, of those students, right? Like I was. So anyway, I just love the point that you raised where you said, I can't tell from the kids in my class whose parent it is, right? Because the kids, they're like plugged in and digging it, right? Because they're so much smarter than we were.
I think, sorry, Alex, is it okay if I just say something really quickly? Okay. I was just going to say, just to add to your point too, Victoria, again, my class, like it teaches kids how to have these conversations with one another and how to get through really difficult conversations and how to approach topics that maybe, in any other setting, it might be a completely unhinged conversation, or it might result in some kind of speech violence between them or something, and if they learn how to do that, if they learn how to have those conversations, if they learn how to like question and dig really deep, and if they learn how to like really not accept like the first thing, like, okay, you're taught to believe this, like, is that real, is that true, if they are taught to like be questioning all the time, that threatens like a power dynamic, right? Not just like with their parents, though that is a big thing, right? Like their parents don't want their power questioned, but also like people who want to like rule over this country in an extremely fascist way, a more fascist way than we have been in the past, right? That is also threatening to them, because then they have a populace that is like, wait, what? Like, what do you do? Why are you doing this? What are you doing this for?
So that's super ready for the real world, though.
Totally,
too,
that's what I'm saying. Like,
they're gonna be better
that's what I'm
prepared
saying.
when they start working.
Scary.
They're not going to lose their job because they created a marketing campaign with a little black boy in a monkey shirt, right? They're going to know better, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's just kind of, it's just kind of, and I think also, like, again, just going back, it creates this whole thing with the laws, creates just this culture of surveillance where we're supposed to be like looking over our shoulder, and like we're supposed to be like kind of careful and like walking on eggshells, and like and I know that it's harder for teachers than it is for me. It's just because like who I am and where I've been through, and when that makes it a little easier for me, and I get that. But I think like that's the most heartbreaking thing about it, is that it's really just about surveillance. And like if you would just say, oh, like screw the surveillance, then what are they going to do? They can't stop us all. There's too many of us. So I don't know. It's just kind of.
Yeah, I'm so glad you both brought up the role of parents, because looking at the data from Florida Freedom to Read Project, they actually looked into how many parents are actually requesting their children have limited access to certain books. And it's only 1 to 6% of the state's parents actually requesting a limited accessibility. I want to bring Max into the conversation. I know Prism Florida has been advocating against these book bans, and you do incredible work with queer youth across the state. What are students going to lose by not having these books accessible to them? And I know you had your hand up, so whatever you wanted to comment, go ahead.
Yeah, so and the kitten's back. I really wanted to first comment on something that I think was super important that Steph brought up, and that is or that speaks to something super important that Steph brought up, and that is really the proliferation of right-wing hate groups in the state of Florida. The ways that our school boards in particular have become battlegrounds in the same way that public education more broadly has become a political battleground. I think something that resonates with me is the group itself. Recently, we were fairly monumental in community engagement surrounding an item in Miami-Dade to recognize October as LGBT History Month. And my cat is scratching my thigh right now, so let me put her on the floor. She's new, sorry. But we were monumental in organizing around what quickly became last year and then continued into this year the most engaged with a single agenda item in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, which is the third largest school district in the nation. And so it definitely got a lot of attention, and as a result, I got a lot of attention from Fathers for Freedom. They actually made not one but 2 Instagram posts about a rainbow shirt that I have a tendency to wear at protests and similar events. We've seen the conversation devolve not even from being about issues riddled with misinformation, but just hostility to try to demean and demoralize the people that are here to support kids. That we have seen, these what have devolved into intimidation, have devolved into attempts at doxing and personal attacks to try to again demoralize queer people in the state amidst the already demoralizing legislative environment that we face. So I wanted to touch on that and express my condolences, because as someone who's experienced the direct harassment is what I'll call it from some of these right-wing hate groups. It is a difficult burden to bear, and so I want to express some solidarity on that front. Turning to the question about book bans. So we have seen a really hostile environment towards literature. I think that's no secret. Florida has, I believe, the highest number of book bans. A recent report came out that showed that Florida has the highest number of book bans out of any other state in the United States, which is she is so distracting. Adorable. Which is extremely detrimental to our young people. When we talk about education, a concept that comes up often is we call mirrors and windows. So mirrors let us look back at ourselves to recognize that even if we're facing these trials and tribulations based on parts of ourselves that we cannot change, there are folks who have faced that same discrimination, who have faced those same struggles for similar reasons, and have still gone on to do great and monumentous things throughout history. There was something so powerful about representation in that way. The other side is windows. It lets us look into the lives of people who might have different lived experiences from our own, and build empathy and compassion for those people. And so representation is so critical and so important. Unfortunately, in the state of Florida, but this is a trend that rings true in book banning really across the world, we often see that the voices that are most silenced through book bans are the same voices that have historically been silenced more broadly, namely people of color and queer people, and especially at the intersection of the two, which is a very, very unfortunate reality when we know how important representation is, we know how important academic freedom and the diversity of thought is, but that is sort of the case that we're facing. Touching a little bit on the specifics of how the law impacts that. Essentially the way the book banning works in the state of Florida now is any parent can make a complaint against a book that is in their classrooms or in their kids' classrooms or in the district. Once that happens, it has to be removed, I believe, within 5 days, pending review. And then depending on the district, the process might vary. And then the school board will make a determination as to whether or not they'd like to reintroduce the book or keep it off of shelves. If that resulting decision is one that the parent who complained is not very fond of, they're allowed to request for a special magistrate, which is a financial burden that the district has to bear. To my knowledge, there is no recourse for someone that did not make the initial complaint to have that same special magistrate. So what that means is if you have a parent who sees a book like, for example, Genderqueer, which and I think in 2021 was the most banned book in the United States. And you have a parent who complains about this and requests that it be pulled off of those school shelves. It has to be pulled within 5 days. It's reviewed by media specialists and other folks in the district, and then the district will decide if they want to bring it back. Should that district decide this is completely age appropriate, maybe they decide it's age appropriate for these specific grade levels for high school, for instance, and we're going to put it back in high school shelves. If the parent who complained doesn't like that, which obviously they wouldn't because they complained about it for a reason, there's a reason they went so far as to complain about the book, they can ask for a special magistrate, and whether the complaint was ridiculous in the first place, right? The district are still universally going to be the ones to bear that financial burden, even if that special magistrate decides the district was right and their decision was totally valid and we're going to keep the book on the shelves. The district still has to pay for that special magistrate. And so it drains financial resources. So you create this environment where the most likely outcome and the least financially damaging outcome across the board is not going to be academic freedom. It's just going to be doing whatever these small subset of parents want, and we know it's a small subset. Again, we have some districts where I don't remember the exact county, but there was one district where there was several dozen book bans, and they were all from one single parent complaining about all of these books. And so you have this environment where this very, very small, hyper minuscule subset of parents are able to dictate what books are accessible to students across the district, which is obviously extremely damaging for academic freedom and for our young people's ability to learn and hear from a diverse subset of thought.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest consequences of this that I've heard from parents and educators I've spoken to is that it's ultimately impacting the quality of education here in Florida, and also one of the causes of folks leaving the public education system. Another one of those causes is the voucher program, Steph, which you brought up. And all of these compounding factors is unfortunately adding to the defunding of the public school system. Brittany, I want to talk to you a little bit about the work that you do with Power U. What resources will the community have if the public education system continues to be defunded? How will people be impacted by that?
Yeah, I mean, there will be a very large impact across like all areas. I think the biggest impact that we will, or the biggest way that we'll be able to get information after these things happen, because we're going in the direction of these things happening. Like, there's not enough pushback for the public school system to hold its, hold the shield up and stop the override from coming, right? So, we're gonna have to lean on each other, right? We're going to have to lean on community organizations. We're going to have to lean on churches. I went to a town hall that was held recently around the banning of the African American Studies program, and they were like, "We're going to have to go back to having, class at the bottom of the church and bringing everybody over to the community center and the libraries and holding space." But I also think that it's going to impact not only the parents, but the teachers and the quality of teachers that we're going to have, right? Because like Steph is saying, it's only so long someone can put up with somebody coming in and constantly surveilling you, constantly telling you to change, constantly looking over your shoulder. It's only so long that good teachers who are doing the work outside of class as well and putting in those hours outside of class to make sure that the curriculum as well are going to hold up. And we already have a teacher shortage here in Florida. So it's only going to make the situation worse. I also think that the parents who are impacted by this are also going to feel, so many more parents than the ones who are getting a voice are going to be impacted by this, because we are at work, because we have other kids who have other things going on, and we actually aren't able to attend these PTA meetings where they might be talking about this if your school has a PTA program, right? Because a lot of our public schools, our parents aren't in the PTA program, doing the dinners, doing the coming to the meetings and making the decisions. Our parents are working, especially with inflation, especially with rent increasing in Florida, right? Our parents are out doing labor in other areas, and they aren't the ones who are at these school board meetings that are during school hours, so even our teachers can't make it, right? They aren't the ones that are there being able to advocate and say, I want this for my child, this is a bad thing, I am against these book bans. They don't have the time. So if we take the public schools away, that's going to make it even harder for those parents who don't have access to the information to actually be able to get the information, right? So we're going to see, and to I think Victoria's point, this is not preparing our students to go out into the world, right? So if we move them into these schools where they only can learn these certain things, where they only have access to certain information, when they go out into the world, you think anxiety is bad now? You think depression is bad now? You think people are having trouble with their identity now? Right? When we are forcibly going into schools and taking things out and restricting them from being able to read it and restricting them from being able to access this information, we're telling them that they're not good enough, or that they are not welcome, or they are not able to exist, right? So it's also going to impact the way that we interact with each other, the way that we interact in the workplace, the way that we interact at the grocery stores is going to impact everybody. And one other thing that we see from Florida specifically is that other states are taking what we do and running. Okay, like this is not the launching pad, this is the start line. You know what I'm saying? Like, people are looking to Florida and being like, oh, it worked over there, let's try this over here. And it is working in Texas, and it is working in South Carolina, and it's gonna continue to happen all over our country. Yeah, I think the impact is, one of the I would love to live in New Orleans. I love their food. I love the culture. But one of the reasons why I kind of push back against that for myself is that they've completely taken over the schools there. They have completely taken over the schools, the curriculum, everything. And these students aren't getting access to what they actually need to be healthy, to be sane, to be productive and responsible citizens in our current society, what we live in right now. So yes, the impact is going to be great. And I think that not the only thing, but the biggest thing that we will have if these things, or when these things continue to happen, is each other. We will have to lean on community. We will have to lean on, and even, I would say, even now, like, we should be joining organizations now, right? We should be talking to each other now. We should should be calling up our sister and our cousin and like, girl, are they banning books at your school? What they talking? What them administrator doing for Steph over there at that school? You hear what's happening with Steph? Like, we need to be talking to each other about these issues now, because that is the only way that we're going to actually get people to show up and advocate against them. So hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you so much. I want to shift to, something that you touched on, Brittany, which is how this is like a launching pad and a pattern we're seeing across the country. The presidential election is coming up in a year. Governor DeSantis is, one of the guys going for the spot. What does this mean for the presidential election, and what can folks do to organize against these laws? Anyone who wants?
Yeah, so we're really seeing a race to the right here in the Republican Party. There's been a growing trend of folks just wanting to be the loudest, and I think that Ron DeSantis in particular has taken that trend in stride for sure. While he bobbles his head around, and we've seen these cultural war issues become red meat, the red meat for the Republican Party and for the base of the Republican Party, in a way that just is totally lacking in humanity. It's totally lacking in a recognition of other people as human beings, quite frankly, and really diluting these issues into very black and white things, which we know none of these issues are black and white. As Brittany noted, and I think it's important to reiterate, what happens in Florida happens across the country. There's a reason that we have been considered a bellwether for the country up until recently, and we have influence over the legislative environment in other states and nationally, and so that will, of course, only be exacerbated if someone like Ron DeSantis were to ascend to the throne of the White House, right? And take one of his prime campaign slogans is "Make America Florida," and we have seen how Florida has become a really, really hostile environment for marginalized people, and that should he be able to reach that that position, which polls make it seem like he probably won't, but should he manage, we're in a very, very dire and scary situation for marginalized people across the country. In terms of organizing, I think there's a lot of different things that folks can do that are monumentally important. One of the baselines and foundational ways that folks can get organized is first by knowing what they're organizing around. That means staying aware of what's happening in current events. That means staying aware of developments that are happening related to the issues that we care about, in particular educational freedom. One of those is by making sure that you're not only in tune with news and things like that about these issues, but they are also in tune with grassroots work that's happening, whether it be in your community or nationally, but especially community organizing. I'm very fond of grassroots work, making sure that you're in tune with local organizations that are on the ground, that have a finger on the pulse, where it's their whole bread and butter is to know what's going on, and so tuning in that arena is a really, really solid baseline, and starting to get some direction there. And then it's making sure that you're proactive about seeing if there's events that are happening, whether it be an item that's being heard at a school board meeting, or something's happening with the Board of Education, or a bill that's being introduced and that needs folks to speak on, and showing up. Right, staying in tune and then showing up are the really, really important things. I had someone that was at one of my staff was on another panel last week, and someone had asked a question while I was in the audience, and it was, what can I do on Monday to fight back against this? And the response is, there is not going to just definitively be something that you can do on a specific day. If you want to get involved, you need to consistently be looking for when those asks are happening, and then making sure that when your community needs you, when whether they be these local organizations or individuals who are organizing need you, that you are there to answer that call. It will not be expected. It will happen last minute, and there will inevitably be some moment that is serendipitous enough for you to be like, you know what, I don't have work that day, and then taking the plunge into that, and being able to do that is so critical. And so those, it all happens quickly, and it all happens quite without deliberation, I'll say. But that's sort of the beauty of community organizing in some ways, as well as, the stress of it all.
So we just got a question, and just so everyone knows, we have about 5 minutes left. So if anyone wants to ask questions, now's the time. Drop it in the Q&A app. So we have a question that says, since a lot of these laws / culture wars are framed as issues of parental rights, how do you think we can fight against these kinds of euphemisms and rhetorical sleights of hand? Steph, I know you had your hand raised. Do you want to answer that question too?
I wasn't thinking about answering that question, but I will just answer that question really quickly. I was going to add to what Max was saying, but we can come back to it if we have time. That as a teacher, as a person who teaches rhetoric in my class, you got to call it what it is. If they're trying to say parental rights, you say they're racist, they're transphobic, they're homophobic. You tell them how they are. You have to call it like it is. You can, I know I throw around the term fascist a little too much, but I think it's just because it has power to it, it has bite to it, it makes people think. So you got to call it what it is. You just have to say the thing. Like if this person is saying, oh, it's my right as a parent, and I just think the next question is, what are you so afraid of? What scares you about your kid engaging with this, and then call their fears for what they are. I think that's a really simple response to those people who want to hide behind those things.
Sorry, I was muted. Will, do you want to answer the question?
Absolutely. So, I think the main way to fight against this rhetoric is by changing it. There's all this conversation about parental rights, and, we just need to bring up the concept of student rights, because, a parents' rights end where students' rights begin. So, I always go back to, I don't think parental rights as a concept is a bad thing. I think that parents should be involved in their children's education, and should be involved in the school system, and should be going to school board meetings if possible. I don't think that's a bad thing. But obviously their rights stop where mine begin. So if there's something that I need to be hiding from my parents for my own safety, then it's not a parent's rights to know that. It's not a parent's rights to abuse their kids. So, I think the problem with this rhetoric, or, honestly, what makes it effective is there are a lot of parents who, even my own, who feel that the school system is teaching a certain perspective of life, which it is, and teaching only certain things, and things are happening that they're not involved in. And I can empathize with that. I can empathize with a parent wanting to be more involved in their kids' lives. And there's a lot of parents who are then hearing this rhetoric and thinking that applies to them, when in reality, it doesn't. It's about this. It's like you said, rhetoric covering up this whole other thing of blatant homophobia, of blatant transphobia. So, that's why it's effective, and that's why we have to fight back with students' rights, because that they go hand in hand, and they can work together, but one does not trump the other. Well, actually, students' rights trumps parents' rights, because like individual freedom. But yeah,
students actually go to the schools. Parents might pay for it through our taxes, but students actually go there. But you know, I'm a mom, you know, and I want my Black child to learn about African American history and to understand how systems over generations have impacted her life, right? My child has two moms, so regardless of her sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, you know, it's important for her to see her family represented in the books that are in the libraries there. Is part of why my wife wrote a children's book, you know, because there weren't children's books out there with two Black moms, you know, with the kid. It's called Ma, Where's Mommy? And so those are, you know, realities. And so my rights as a parent, right, also matters. And so we have to define what parents' rights actually really should mean, devoid of all of the biases and isms, right? And, you know, yes, I think we should call a thing. And we also need to make sure that we're calling the thing, describing the thing, right, as what it really is, which, you know, parents should have a role in what our kids learn, but it should not be at the detriment of anybody else's children. And that's a lot of what we end up seeing, or a detriment to the safety of our kids in the case of people who might find themselves on what NBJC calls the family rejection to poverty pipeline, you know? And so those are things that we have to really sit with and understand as well.
Thank you, Victoria. And Max, and then we'll wrap up after.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many angles to this question. I absolutely love it. I think one of which is sort of already touched on, is the concept of students' rights. At the end of the day, schools are not meant to serve parents. They're broadly, they're meant to serve the community by making they're a public good, making an educated voter base and an educated citizenship. But as individually, they're meant to serve students. You know, I'm in college as a student. No one would argue that is for my parents. Right? That's squarely for my benefit. Education is very much for my benefit. That's something that my parents beat into me, is that I'm not going to school for them. I'm going to school for myself. And I think as a very, very salient and important thing for us to acknowledge. You know, I also think that we've seen the ways in which the parents' rights movement has really been, to some extent, commandeered pretty extensively to serve as a front for, I said if it walks like a duck and it looks like a duck, it is a duck. It's fascism, right? It's transphobia, it's homophobia, it's racism, and it's bigotry. You know, we have seen there. I don't think many people would argue that parents shouldn't have involvement in their child's education. We know that leads to improved academic performance, right? When you have your parents, generally, when you have your parents involved in your education. But when you see something like that commandeered, I oftentimes say in the first version of the Don't Say LGBT law, it has a piece about disclosing to parents any changes in their kids, mental health, mental or physical health. And some districts may interpret that to essentially include outing students. Not all, but some. And the reality of it all is that these parents that are the champions of the parents' rights movement do not want the right to be able to know whether or not their kid is gay or trans. They want the right to be able to control whether or not their kid is gay or trans. It is something that they will never be able to do. No legislation will ever give a parent a right or ability to make that decision. It just simply will never happen. They can beg to Ron DeSantis, they can beg to the Republican Party for something that will let them control whether or not their kid grows up to be gay or trans. There is nothing that Ron DeSantis can do for you. And that is, I think, something that the folks behind this new version of the parents' rights movement are going to eventually have to confront. That's just not a possibility. It's also, I think, something that's really important is for us to find ways to flip this on its head, right? When we're talking about parents' rights, you know, if we want to say that parents' rights are important, which I still think that parents' rights are important, students' rights are important as well. What about the rights of arguably a majority of parents who really dislike legislation like this? We know that there is a wide swath of parents who are pro-comprehensive sex education, who are pro-LGBT inclusive education, who are against censorship and are for academic freedom, right? And who support their kids' pronouns, their trans kids' pronouns being respected, and all of these different things, and that this legislation and rulemaking really infringes on the rights of a good chunk of parents who do want their kids to grow up in an environment and in an education system that is going to be representative of all walks of life. It's going to actually prepare them for the workforce. It's going to prepare them for real adult lives, and the world that we actually live in, and want their kids to have a high quality, thorough education as parents should want for their kids, and are being stripped of that and are therefore kind of being stripped of their own rights. When you're in an environment where, again, this small subset of parents can dictate what books other people's kids can read, when you're in an environment where a small subset of parents can dictate what identities can be represented in our schools or what type of education, sex education, can be allowed in our schools, how is that parental rights? That's parents' rights for a very, very small subset, a very, very small minority of parents in our state. And that's really I think what's super important is to recognize that the legislation that claims to be of benefit to parents' rights really strips those rights away from so many parents.
Absolutely. Brittany, I want to give you an opportunity to give any final comments, and then we will wrap up.
Yeah, the only final comments I have is for us to definitely do what we can and show up, as others have been saying. Sorry about that. Give me one second. Yeah, so just to continue to show up. I know I mentioned earlier that a lot of these things happen outside of the times where many of us can actually attend and be participants in the decision making. If you can, we need you. We need you to stand up. We need you to show up. We need you to call your friends who can. We need grandparents in the room. We need aunties and uncles in the room. We need everybody, to Max's point, who believes in these types of things being wrong, to stand up and go against that small little bit of people who have the time and energy to try to disrupt everybody else's living experience, right? So we need you guys to join organization. We need you guys to join PTA. We need you guys to go to ESAC meetings at your schools. We need you to show up at the school board hearings and pay attention. They're also broadcasted on Facebook, Instagram, X now. So like we have the ability to know what is going on, and just reach out to your friends and family and share the information. I think the more that we talk about these things, the more we get other people involved, the more we all come together, the less this thing will be a problem, and the less chance that more bills like this will come to pass. So yeah, I'm just asking us all to show up and do our part if we can and when we can. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Well, thank you, audience and panelists, for joining me. This has been Class Action. It's been a joy to have this conversation with all of you. And thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.